My name's S. Rob, and this is Horrormail Tales. A letter. The appointment. Wouldn't it be nice if bad things really only happened to bad people and good things to good people? Or even if the world was such that bad, misfortunate or evil events were always the result of some mistake. If the world was like this, all that would be needed would be to be good and to not make mistakes, to be cautious. But nowhere I know of is like this. Not the highest reaches of heaven or the deepest levels of hell. This is strange, because hell was the only place that is supposed to be fair, where people get punished fairly for what they have done. Unfortunately, what is good or bad is not always that clear, and many people think many aspects of other people's lives as being evil which harm no one, while aspects of their own that harm some far off person they think of as being harmless. But this story starts in the most unusual of places, a land called Earth. I came to like Earth because it was the place of my birth, and so nowhere was quite like it to me. In fact, everything was as it should have been for a person with a humdrum life. However, in life things rarely stay as they are supposed to be, and everything changed when one day I found myself having to go for some appointment, and yet I could not think what it was for. But for some reason I knew how crucial it was, and so I duly went. But when I went there, I walked into a room which was the most usual of waiting rooms, not unlike many waiting rooms I had been in before for appointments for doctors and dentists over the years. The only difference was that the room was small and there were only 3 people sitting, and there was a table that seemed slightly too large. But I did not think too much of the ill-fitting decor, but I was unsettled. I introduced myself, talking to another man seated like I was, but slightly taller. "Hello," he said, back, knowing that somehow things would not turn into a full conversation. I replied, "Hello, it's a little hot outside." "Is it? It wasn't when I came in." The woman looked over and introduced herself. We then sat, and I began to notice that the people here seemed slightly oddly dressed. Not very odd, just slightly, as if their clothes were slightly out of date, but not worn. But I realised that I was not exactly a fashion victim, and so I came to the conclusion that it was probably my clothes which were out of date. I wished to know why the other people were here, especially when I realised that I did not know why I was there. I could have been there for a financial matter, a medical matter, or even to be arrested. But since I was fairly sure I hadn't done anything wrong, I thought I would just wait to see what would happen. It was then that the woman pulled up the table, and it seemed even larger than before. And I somehow found that I was sitting at the table. It was then that the other man began to talk about how he hoped he would get a job. The woman nodded, and so did I, as if I had somehow remembered that this was a great career opportunity. It was gradual, but we started to talk about the jobs we had done. And there seemed to be no pattern of shared experience. It was then that the first person was called, and it was the woman. And she went in and was there only a short time before the man was called. Being last, I was sure would work to my advantage. And then I was called through. I walked around the corner and went into a room. But the room changed as soon as I sat down. And I saw that what I was looking at changed from a man to a winged creature with faces on at least 3 sides of its head. One face of a man, one of a bird, one of a bull-type creature. I was of course shocked and stood up to leave, and found myself restrained. I was certain that this was some type of drug-fueled haze, and wondered if this was how mind control was done. But I soon found that a type of calm came over me, and as I sat, the creature told me that heaven had use of me, and that I had important work to do for heaven. Upon the earth, I felt a tremendous pressure to agree, but said I could not agree to it without knowing if I could do it. And I explained that I must know what it is. This seemed reasonable, and so I was told that I would need to travel within my own country only, and that I would check upon people to make sure that certain people were doing certain things. And if they were not, I was then to tell my superiors. This seemed quite reasonable, but I remembered from the Bible that it said that if ever I saw anything that looked like God, looked light or angelic, that it was liable to be Satan's trickery, that I was not to believe it. It was difficult for me, but I felt that God was on my side, and so I stood up and said, I could not do this, and would not be seduced by evil. I learned how bad a mistake this was quickly, when the creature before me had a terrible rage, and I was grabbed, and yet I did not fall down some demonic hole. No, I was instead beaten, but not hard when compared to what it could do. I was then handcuffed and a chain placed around my legs, and I was left this way for long enough to feel very hungry. I felt at this point that there must be demonic, and yet here I was. No one at all, or anything at all, had helped me. I was then taken by more angelic looking creatures, and yet they laughed, and without showing any care, they tossed me into a smaller room. I hated this smaller room and did not know how long I was to be there, when I was taken by men, not angels or demons, but men, and taken and placed within a van. I should have tried to run, but by now I was so hungry I could not move, and mostly I just slept, and that is all. I was taken from the van, and I did not know where I was being taken. It was almost a relief when I was taken out and placed into a jail. It was strange because at no point was I given any chance to explain. And yet, after only a few days, I realised that this was simply a jail, not hell or heaven. It turned out that the beings had simply created a new identity for me and given me a criminal record, and so I was in jail for armed robbery, and of course there would be no parole, because how could there be without any actual crime? There was no one to explain to, and I suffered terribly at the hands of the prison guards. One day I was taken from my sleep to a room, and there again was the being that had placed me here. I said nothing, but it talked to me. I was told that all the people I knew were dead, and to prove this I was allowed to try to call them. There had been no telephones up until this point. Somehow I thought it was all a lie, but it was not. And I was released under a different identity altogether. In fact, it was as if as soon as I walked out of the prison gates, I had grown taller and broader. And I even found that when I looked in the mirror, I looked an altogether different man. There was no one to help me, and so I struggled. And not for some short amount of time, but for years. It was as if every place I went to live would not take me, or would burn down, or break apart. I was sacked from jobs, and nothing I did ever worked out. Oh, I know this is just my story, because people live for decades like this. I went a long time knowing that I should have been saved by God, and yet I was not. No one saved me, and it was just after I had been burned in a terrible chemical spill and lying in hospital that what could be thought of as my first piece of good luck occurred. This came in the form of the creature I had seen before. It walked through the door of my private ward, and I spat at it and said that its evil may destroy me, but I would never yield to evil. The creature, with what I could see, now was 4 faces and a set of wings, said to me, "Good. It is your goodness that was needed." It is always the case that those chosen to serve the Lord our God. Whose God? I asked. The devil is not my God. The one true God, he called by different names, but the one and only God. But as I was saying, it is necessary for people who undertake important, holy duty to become purer and so have a better soul. This means that just as the saint were put through the most difficult of tasks and the most difficult of times to cleanse them, so have you, but to a lesser extent. This can't be true. I am afraid it is. It was when you refused to cooperate because you thought I was Satan that convinced us. You passed the interview with flying colours. I was shocked. How could it be true? I did realise that there was no way I could do anything but accept my new job. I tried to tell myself it was for the better. I was healed right there and led someplace and found myself on the street. Again, a different person altogether. And I found some instructions in my pocket. And there was a name and to check up on. This was a small amount of money and just enough to get there, and maybe something very small to eat. So knowing what I must do, I took the money I had and walked to a gun store and bought a very cheap gun with bullets. I walked right out of the shop. I then found a church, walked into it, and looked at the cross, and with a cry, I screamed, "You complete bastard," and shot myself in the head. I awoke in hell, and yet the burn of the fire was not as I thought it would be. I thought that maybe I would suffer here more, or that I would become a figure of fun, but found that even in hell there is no fairness, because if there was, I would be punished according to some set of rules for the many sins I was guilty of. But hell is not like that, and I live there still, and it is no better there than earth, or any worse. I even got to talk to the devils and demons there, and found that sometimes the bad guys are easier to get on with than the good guys. I live there still, but I look back and I know that nothing I could have done would have made any difference. But down here, the angels do not go. The only angels down here are fallen ones. And this makes me feel a little safer and a little more contented than I think I have ever known before.